Hello and welcome to Contemplation from Somerville College. This week I'm delighted to be joined by the soprano Dame Emma Kirkby. She studied classics at Somerville in the late 1960s, but is now one of the foremost sopranos of all time. She is an iconic solo singer of early music, and as The Guardian once said of her, she has quietly been the voice of musical revolution. She was awarded a DBE in 2007, and in 2011, she was the 6th recipient of the Queen's Medal for Music. And finally, in 2019, she was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award for services to music by Gramphone magazine. Emma, welcome, and thank you very much indeed for talking with me today.
Thank you very much.
How's things going where you are?
Well, we're lucky. We have a garden. There's lots of green space around. There are woods. I think I'm in the very spoilt part of the London population, to be honest.
I can see that we have several bits of greenery surrounding us, so even inside that things feel very natural. Tell us, let's start by hearing a little bit about Somerville and Oxford when you were there.
Well, I came up in '66. I had the interview the year before, of course, that you did in those days, in December. And somebody looked after me, a second year looked after me and told me about a choir she sang in, which got me very excited because I had just, 2 years before, discovered polyphony, and I was thrilled to bits doing it at school. We had a very enterprising music teacher who went on to run the whole school music at Sherborne, Augusta Miller, amazing woman. And she started a madrigal group when I was 14, and I just thought it was wonderful, especially when I got the chance to sing in the Bird 4-part mass with tenors and basses, and I just thought it was amazing. So when I met Liz Barber at interview and she said, I'm in this choir that sings polyphony, I thought, that's what I want to do.
Fantastic.
I came to read classics, of course, and I'd had a fabulous classics teacher at school, very lucky. She knew the Oxford colleges, she knew where to send people, and I was very happy with Somerville. It was a lovely choice.
Absolutely. And you were under the sort of tutorship of Miriam Griffin and Nan Dunbar.
Yes. And Leslie Brown.
Yes, who says hello, by the way.
Yes. And two other amazing philosophy teachers, Philippa Foote and Elizabeth Anscombe. So it was a pretty incredible college to have experience of, even though I never thought of myself as a philosopher. It was wonderful in the second half of my degree to go and see these extraordinary people.
Yes, absolutely. I'm not sure about Philippa and Elizabeth, but I know that Nan and Miriam were certainly very heavily involved in the musical side of things as well, and very keen to sort of get music going to a high quality level in Somerville.
Yes, Miriam was particularly, she was my supervisor for longer because she was an ancient historian, so she took you through the second half of the degree in those days. You didn't have a choice. You couldn't carry on with literature. I think I was a bit disappointed at the thought at the time, but to be honest, maybe it was good for me because I loved the first half, worked quite hard on the literature, which suited me. And second half, I did the girl thing. I did what I was told. I wrote the essays, but didn't quite engage as much as I was doing with the Schola and lots of other singing activities, to be honest.
Absolutely. You mentioned Schola, so that's Schola Cantorum of Oxford, I guess, and you were singing in that from straight away at university, or did you join later on?
I didn't get in the first term. I got in the second.
Well, it shows that even the very best people don't get in the first time round.
It was a question of spaces, and my sight reading wasn't great, and so I waited a term and was then allowed in. So
terrific. It's so good to hear you say that, because there will be sopranos even now, well, any vocal part who come to Oxford and audition for choirs like Schola and won't get in. So to hear that someone who of your sort of prestige is say they struggle with sight reading. I mean, people learn how to sight read at Oxford, and when you get thrown into the pool, you sort of learn how to swim a little bit.
Certainly do. And sopranos, it's a sad truth. There are just too many of us. I think I was a pingy, reliable, in-tune voice, but not that special. A useful sound, but and open to everything. And yeah, I fitted in very well. But I was in awe of some of the other voices already there. I can tell you, they were wonderful.
That's really lovely. Did people read music at Somerville when you were there, or is that a more recent development?
We had one music undergraduate in my year called Linda Fox. She had the most divine soprano voice and sang in the Schola. I think she was the only one. She did feel a little bit lonely, but on the other hand, she had a faculty, and classics in those days didn't. So there was a place for all the music students to meet. But with classics, we went from one dining hall to another for lectures, and we thought nothing of it. And to be honest, it's only in the last few years I've actually got around to visiting the new classics faculty, which is, it's not that new anymore, but it's wonderful. It's a beautiful, small but delightful place, St Giles.
Very nice indeed. So you sang with Schola. Am I right in thinking you didn't sing with Somerville choir because there wasn't really a choir there, but you sang with Merton? Is that right? I'm not sure. I might have got that wrong. You did. Great.
That's exactly right. Yes, there wasn't a Somerville Chapel choir then, I don't think. And Merton, Andrew Parrott was there. He was in the Schola. He was very busy doing many things. He ran the Kodai choir as well in Merton, and even got some of us to come along and join the Glagolitic Mass of Janacek, which was a pretty amazing experience. And he ran the choir in Merton, 12 people. It was wonderful.
Fantastic.
It was also the first time I was paid for singing. I think we got £2 a service. It was absolutely thrilling.
That's wonderful.
I went home and said to my father, I've just been paid for doing what I love more than anything in my life. And he said, well, the Navy paid me for 30 years to drive ships around.
Wonderful. I love that sort of sensation of this is what I love to do, and I'm actually being financially rewarded as well. So truly terrific stuff. I think we should hear you sing something now, and I know you've selected 4 pieces of music for us that we can hear during this little chat. I think there's a piece from Messiah, your first recording, is it?
Not my first recording ever, but nearly, I think, because the first recording ever would have been Renaissance music with the Consort of Music, and 4-part Dowland and madrigals. But it took a couple of years after that. I sang some Purcell as well with Christopher Hogwood, because it was the same record company, the same producer, who suggested to different directors they might like to try this or that singer. That's how I met Christopher Hogwood. A very, very big influence in my life, of course.
Absolutely.
And his Messiah was, I think it was 79, something like that. But I was incredibly lucky because actually his resident soprano for such purposes was Judith Nelson, a very, very lovely singer from America. And she and I already did some duets for him for Purcell and Couperin, and had a great time. She was an ideal singing partner, just so friendly, so mature, but imaginative and kind. And we had a great time. And when it came to Messiah, Christopher wanted to use James Bowman, who was a buddy at the time, and they'd done lots together. And James happened to have a pharyngitis, which just ruled him out for nearly a year. And Christopher just couldn't bear to ask anybody else, which I can perfectly understand, actually. In those days, there weren't so many other countertenors anyway, and that was such a special voice. And so then he thought, well, there are many versions of Messiah, so let's find a Messiah that didn't need Guadagni, the castrato for whom these amazing and more virtuosic alto pieces were written. And there was the first Foundling Hospital Messiah that had 2 sopranos, and the second soprano got given random pieces that the alto would have sung. And so I was brought in to do that, which was extraordinary good luck for someone my age, because no sopranos had sung these pieces. So I didn't have this feeling of trying to match a dozen other brilliant performances from others. I just had to address those arias as they were. And But Who May Abide up in G or A, I can't remember, fairly high, it's great fun.
Fantastic. Well, let's hear that now. what an absolutely terrific performance, and so rarely heard as a soprano singing that. Emma, it's absolutely amazing with some of the camera angles you saw in that performance of your impeccable vocal technique. Singers will know that with coloratura, with fast notes and big intervals, it's very easy to sort of wobble the jaw around to try and achieve that. But what we saw there was real fantastic technique and not a hint of jaw movement throughout all those short notes. So that's amazing. The other thing that I particularly enjoyed, and we'll talk a little bit about over the next sort of 10-15 minutes, is the early music style. You'll have noticed the violins, no chin rests, no shoulder rests. This is very much the sort of the period performance style of going back to instruments as maybe they would have been. So really terrific. Let's go back to the very beginning and talk about your sort of school days. I know you were at Hanford School, and rather beautifully, there's a little quote on their website which says, "Girls leave Hanford with a love of music that we hope will carry them through their lives." And that certainly is the case for you. You clearly had a good school days through Hanford and Sherborne, as you've talked about earlier.
I had wonderful 2 years at Hanford. I went to 6 schools altogether because my father was in the Navy, and the last 3 were boarding schools, 4, 5 and 6. And number 5 was just extraordinary. I had 2 years from 10 to 12 years old, and it was absolute heaven. It was a Jacobean manor house full of girls wearing shorts and climbing trees and wandering all over the grounds, but marshalled in for Latin lessons or to ride ponies or to read Shakespeare around the room with a retired headmaster who was quite the most amazing English teacher you would ever meet anywhere. Well, we little girls of 10, we were absolutely mad about Shakespeare. He was supposed to teach us history as well. So we did Henry IV Part 1, Henry IV Part 2, Richard II. That was our history. Because we
quite an education. Really amazing to consider what sort of education might be like in sort of primary schools and prep schools. And nowadays it's very varied. So what amazing luck, and how much fun you must have had doing this. I can see the joy in your face talking about it now.
It certainly was. It was just a glorious place. I was very, very lucky. And Sherborne was excellent too, obviously a bit more formal and bigger. And I was a bit shocked when we read Shakespeare around the room, how boringly everybody seemed to read this stuff. Otherwise, of course, the Stanford was wonderful. Music was excellent, and I wasn't a serious musician because I tried to play the piano, but wasn't very good at it at all. So I wasn't that kind of a musician. But the choir was very important and has always been, and everyone wanted to get into the choir. And I enjoyed that very much. And then alongside that came the madrigal group. But we did have individual singing lessons, either at Hanford or at Sherborne. And to be honest, at that point, I'm glad I didn't, because I'm not sure people really knew how to teach solo singing for teenagers. I think it was, on the whole, the assumption was you were better just learning to listen to other people and sing with them and be musical and sort out the vocals, the fancy vocal things later on. Particularly someone like me. I was young when I left school anyway. I was younger than other people. I'd changed schools so often I ended up younger, and so I hadn't sort of matured very much. And my voice it wasn't the sort of voice that has suddenly got so ample that it needed any kind of guidance. It was just a pingy girl, it was fine. And that was my role in the schola. And of course, there I did encounter people who were 2 or 3 years older than me anyway, with the most glorious half-produced sounds, as it were, that ready for all sorts of other contexts. And I was in awe of them, but it wasn't the way I worked at that point.
Absolutely fascinating. It's so lovely to hear you talking about it. So with Schola in mind, it's easy for modern day musicians from Oxford to look at the quality of choral singing in Oxford and see some absolutely fantastic chapel choirs, as well as Schola, and numerous other excellent chamber choirs, either in the university or in the city. But when you look back to your days with Schola, I suspect that the quality of music making in the chapel choirs wasn't quite as stellar, particularly the opportunities for girls. It's easy to think about the music at Christ Church Cathedral and New College and Magdalen, where they had trebles. But it's probably fair to say that this high quality music making with Schola was really important for you when you were at Oxford.
extremely important. And my very first term, when I did get in, or I think the Easter holidays just after, we recorded Taverna Mass Corona, Missa Corona Spinea, which was just, I was beside myself. I couldn't believe this. It was
I'm getting vertigo just thinking about it, to be honest.
Well, it was one of the tenors who made an addition. Wow. That's the advantage of university, isn't it?
Absolutely. I can think of when people like David Skinner were at Christchurch as well, and that's when he met Andrew Carwood, and that's when the Cardinals Music sort of formed. But this sort of history of scholarship and music meeting in somewhere like Oxford is really almost unique, I'd say. I mean, Cambridge might have something to say about that, but
I felt at the time, definitely as a girl who liked to sing, I was luckier to be in Oxford than Cambridge, actually. Cambridge was all very high level, but it was comes and it was orchestral and it was serious. I don't know, if you want to be a serious singer, you probably should sound operatic already or something. Whereas in Oxford, I don't know, there did seem to be more for the girls to do, and a lot of chamber music. That's the thing. I mean, the stuff in chapel is wonderful, but there's so much else. And my huge good luck, well, lots of things. I mean, I should mention with the Schola that with that the Taverna and various other things, and a memorable Dixit Dominus, I remember too. We had John Burt, who was an extraordinarily charismatic conductor. I mean, very quirky and very determined, and he's still the inégal man. He's written a book called An Unequal Music, which is definitely worth reading, because he says it's not just the French who did unequal. Everyone swung things, and he gets quite angry that people haven't taken that liberty. Everyone's become so straight. So we did an entire Dixit Dominus, everything dotted. It was completely mad, but great fun.
You must have felt you were sort of somewhere in the middle of France when singing it, but that's glorious. I remember his, I think he's the person who wrote that wonderful carol, All and Some.
Maybe. Yeah.
I'm assuming so. That's another, maybe it's not, but.
No, he was a brilliant choral director, no question.
Yeah, but that's certainly all very swung. Ba-dum, bum, 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 ba-ba-dum, ba-dum, bum. Yeah. So there's something very jovial about that.
My other extraordinary good luck was that Bernard Thomas was there at the same time. Patrick Corran, who was a biochemist but playing the lute. Michael Lowe was still doing his archaeology masters, but actually becoming one of the best lute makers in the world. So there were two lutes in this group. Andrew Parrott singing and playing the organ. David Lindley, who later became he's an English professor of Campion. He was playing recorders and keyboard. Two lutes. Andrew and David and Bernard Thomas, who was playing already in Musica Reservata. Bernard played every wind instrument you could imagine and had them in cases, the whole lot, the crumhorns and the Rauschpfeifers and the recorders and everything. And because he played in Musica Reservata, this incredible pioneering group in London, he had the music as well. So we were playing around with Dufay, Rondo, getting lost and forgetting whether we repeated enough A's and B's. You know. Fabulous time. I was so lucky. There was this ad hoc group called the Oxford Early Music Group, and it was just joyful. We did so many things.
I know from first-hand experience that making music with early instruments like crumhorns and rockets and rackets and things like that is absolutely, it's a thrill. I was lucky enough to sing with the Gabrielli Consort in a performance of their Pretorius Christmas Mass a few years ago, and we took it to various places, including two performances in the chapel at Versailles. And between the performances, I sort of wandered around, and everything was shut. So although we couldn't get into the Hall of Mirrors, up in the galleries were all these tables laid out from the musicians who'd left all of their instruments just sort of around between the two performances. And I just remember looking at this table thinking, I don't know what that is, but I can tell it makes the most fantastic sounds. So it's an absolute joy. Anyway, I digress entirely. One thing I certainly wanted to ask you was, I know you've previously said that you never set out to be a professional singer. And if that is the case, then what did you set out to be?
I didn't set out to be a professional singer because I wasn't the sort that professional singers were in those days. I couldn't imagine being accepted in the world of of serious solo singing in those days, because everyone was heading for opera and it was all very magnificent, but that wasn't really ever going to suit me. And I don't know, I mean, the whole idea of proper singing, it meant burnishing a very beautiful voice for a special context where it had to be very loud and ample and magnificent. And I was a chamber animal, and I just wanted to make music with small groups of other people. So it didn't occur to me that there would be a career there. I had a vague dream that when I got my living sorted out with something else, I might have a year off and go and sing madrigals in London. I didn't know what I meant by that, but that was a sort of vague dream. But no, I thought I'd be fine being a school teacher. I enjoyed the subject. I liked children. I thought I'd give it a try. So I did the 1 year extra that you do after, in those days, you do after the degree, the PGCE in Oxford. Though I did sort of, I dutifully took the middle term away from Oxford and did my teaching practice all in one term in Bristol, near where my parents were, because I felt I would be too distracted otherwise. So I dutifully disappeared for a term and then came back and sang my head off again.
Yeah.
And then I was just very lucky. I ended up in a comprehensive school just outside Reading, where there was a wonderful classics course devised by a genius of a teacher, David Precious. And I was just terribly lucky to stumble across this, be sent there as a student from the education department in Oxford to observe and think and thought, I want to teach in that school. And it ended up that way. It was very, very lucky. So I was doing that for 4 years altogether. But I was also married to Andrew Parrott, singing in Taverner Choir in my spare time and having a wonderful, wonderful evenings. And while I was doing that, I met other people who were starting up their groups, particularly Anthony Rooley, but also Peter Holman, Francis Baines. I just started to meet these groups, mainly of instruments, that were looking for certain kinds of singers.
It's really interesting you start talking about those people who are setting up their own groups, because the late 60s and early 70s saw the foundation of so many early music groups. There's a wonderful story that not everyone was in favour. There's one reviewer from Gramphone who said we need a revival of period instruments as much as we need a revival of period dentistry. But I mean, the Consort of early music, founded by David Munro and Christopher Hogwood in 1967, was certainly a trailblazer. And then Tony Rooley's Consort of Music in 1969. And then Trevor Pinnock set up the English Consort in 1972. And in 1973, no less than 3 really quite extraordinary groups that are still around started making music. The Academy of Ancient Music, which we actually saw playing in the Handel from earlier on, founded by Christopher Hogwood. Peter Phillips set up the Tallis Scholars in the same year. And then Andrew Parrott, as you mentioned, and set up the Taverner Consort in about 1973. So it's really fantastic that you said that you didn't want to be a professional singer because there wasn't really the style of singing around, but then suddenly there was this early music sort of focus on music making, and I suppose that's how you sort of transitioned into maybe moving away from being a teacher and thinking, well, do I do this more than I teach?
Exactly. I was incredibly lucky because I was offered some recording sessions, about 3 days, 2 of which were in school term. That's my 3rd year of teaching in a comprehensive school. And I went to the headmaster, who happened to be a very nice man who loved music, and said, I've got this problem. I've been offered this extraordinary chance. What do I do? And he said, sounds wonderful. Take unpaid leave. So I did. And they were very good about that. And that went, I mean, it was terrifying, but it was good fun. And I enjoyed it. And meanwhile, I was doing lots of live tiny concerts around the place with all these other groups. And that just began to mushroom. So my 4th year, I negotiated part-time. And then again, I was very lucky because I was allowed to have Monday to Wednesday at school. And then Thursday to Sunday, I could be a different person, which, I mean, part-time teaching is not usually quite so convenient. I was very, very lucky that that was made to work for me. It was possible because the classics department was teaching all the 12-year-olds in a sort of foundation subject, a foundation course, which was an interesting thing to do anyway. And other things came from that. So it wasn't that difficult to divvy up the 8 classes that needed attention, that could be shared out. I was very lucky though. And by the end of that year, I thought, well, it's going very well and I might as well give this a try. And if it doesn't work, I can go back to teaching. So by September 75, I was no longer a teacher.
Amazing. I suspect if there's one musical collaboration for which you're best known, it's probably your long professional relationship with the Consort of music. How did that come about? How did you meet Tony Ruley?
He was a friend of a friend, and he was looking for singers, and he happened, and I told him about people I knew in Oxford, people like Paul Elliott and David Thomas that he hadn't yet met. And that was helpful. So, and there were 1 or 2 others I can't remember now. And then he happened to hear me sing in a concert in fact, a piece of Taverner, in the Taverner choir. And he rang up the next day and said, I wanted a soprano. I found her. I said, well, who? He said, you. I said, you're mad. I haven't got a technique. He said, well, you better get one because the recording's in 6 months' time.
It is remarkable to think that what you perceive to be your weakness as a singer actually turned into your biggest strength, as you were relatively unique in what you did as a singer, and therefore people setting up choirs thought, well, this is absolutely the person I want to be involved in the music making, because it's the perfect voice for it, because everyone else is just a bit too wobbly, dare I say. It's fascinating to hear you talk about how Tony loved the sound of the lute, and I know that you're very fond of singing with a lutenist as well. One of the pieces you've chosen is indeed a lute song by Robert Johnson, and perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I was lucky to be able to do that with Jacob Lindberg in my career relatively recently, I think 2008, and it was just a short illustration for the South Bank show, which involved really covering as many of my interests as possible. And the lute was obviously going to be central, and it featured various tracks on this show. This one, I think, does work very nicely. And Jacob Lindberg is I think, a great lute virtuoso. He's a very dedicated teacher, and he's got an exciting number of students at the moment at the Royal College, which is lovely. There's some really good ones been coming through his hands in the last few years. I'm very excited by lutes, yes. And Jacob has a lovely way of describing the dynamic of the lute. He says, it can only speak, it can't shout. So when he occasionally goes into a class of young children and introduces the lute to them, he says things like that. And that really works. It makes them really listen. And so the lute is a wonderful thing for supporting speech, because, as Tony Ruley used to say, he's a good Yorkshireman, the sound of the lute starts at now and tapers off. So it has this great advantage that it disappears all the time. It leaves you exposed. It's very daunting to a singer that has always had washes of piano sound around them.
Yeah.
But actually, when you get used to it, it's quite intoxicating, because you know you can do anything. I mean, every tremor will show, every little blip in your voice will show, but every nuance you want to cherish will also come through. And the lute is just the perfect partner for speaking, singing.
Excellent. Well, let's hear you singing Robert Johnson's setting of Full Fathom 5 from The Tempest. I think this is one of only 2 contemporaneous settings from Shakespeare's play, the other one being Thomas Morley, It Was a Lover and His Lass. But this is Emma singing Robert Johnson's Full Fathom 5.
Full fathom 5, thy father lies, of his bones are coral beneath, those are plans that were his eyes, nothing of him that doth fade, but doth suffer a sea change into something
thank you. That was a wonderful setting of a little ditty, Robert Johnson's Full Fathom 5 with the lutenist Jakob Lindberg. Emma, I know you feel very strongly about the communication of text. It's much more about than just singing the words, isn't it?
It is. I've increasingly used the phrase to embody the text, because your whole body does have to be involved. And I discovered this just as I gradually built my technique, hugely with the help of Jessica Cash, I should say. She's a genius teacher, and I found her just at the right moment. And she got me gradually out of my head and into my body. It is a bit of an early music danger that we get very, very involved with thinking about singing rather than actually getting it really into our bodies. But I think even more than that, these days I'm obsessed with consonants and how they relate to you, how they take you to your center, how they take you to the really expressive part, which is your heart. And the consonants, you have to work very hard on them. It's the reverse. You're not spitting them out like English choir boys used to. It's not that. It's almost the opposite, that they engage you so much, and they are emotional things. So I love to use and trust consonants, and I find they actually help me technically incredibly. They save my air. They make things clearer. And when I'm coaching, that's almost about 90% of what I talk about. But the consonants themselves, they work because they take you into your body as well. Of course, the articulators are up here, and that's what actually that little mechanism has to work for you, but it has to refer you to your center all the time.
Absolutely. Engagement of text isn't just, do I understand it? It has to be that mental, philosophical side as well, but the physical act of singing, I mean, it's not just about breath coming out and sound emerging. There has to be a real engagement with the body and the brain and the heart. Exactly.
And then really every song is a little drama as well. There is always a reason for that song being written. There's a person singing it. They have their context, their thoughts, their issues, and you have to step into that. Even if you don't know exactly the story of a song, you have to somehow to step into it and feel it as something you're embodying. Absolutely. So, and that's something that Anthony Rooley has been always relentlessly pursuing, step by step. And with the Consort of Music, we started off getting everything nicely balanced and right, and a 4-part Dowland, which were, had to be very perfect and so on. And that was great, but actually it had to move on. And in the end, we ended up acting a lot of things out because they sort of needed it, especially Italian things, but English too.
This brings us on really beautifully to your next choice of music, which is a madrigal from Monteverdi's fourth book of madrigals, sung by the Consort of Music. The first major difference between what we've heard in the Johnson and this Monteverdi is crucially there's more than one singer involved. So before you sort of introduce the Monteverdi and sort of prepare us for the rather obvious metaphor which it contains, what makes consort singing such a vital part of your work?
It's just addictive, isn't it?
Yeah,
yeah, it is extraordinary that the sharing of sentiments between people, almost always the text is an individual person's lament or celebration, but somehow to have many people voice it, it's very exciting. It's hard to describe, really, but it is also polyphony is just so thrilling. Monteverdi's still right there. His polyphonic skill is obviously consummate, but he's also moving towards more modern dramatic responses, slightly more blocks of sounds. I mean, it's not continuous interweaving lines all the time. At times you have that, and other times you have moments when 2 or 3 people step out and say something and are answered by 3 others. You get the antiphony. You just get the tremendous feeling of dialogue and excitement. And that is quite addictive once you get into it.
Absolutely, and this is really exemplified in this madrigal. Tell us a little bit about what we're about to see.
There is another version of this madrigal, beautifully delivered by Fadrolini, very intense, very anguished, all about lovers in near despair, whereas we felt this was a scherzo. We felt this was a joke. actually. It's a seduction song. And I'm saying, alas, alas, which means I'm dying. And we all know what dying means in the amorous context, and so on. And so we played it completely outrageously, the opposite sense of those words, if you like, from how you could take it. But it was fun to do. And we were in the Palazzo Te. So that's our excuse. That was a palace dedicated to the romps of lovers in Mantova.
Terrific performance there from the Consort of Music with one of Monteverdi's fantastic offerings from the fourth book of madrigals. I just feel a bit sorry for the bass at the end there, who didn't seem to find a partner. Strange version of musical chairs, maybe. You're very, very keen on education and the philosophy of education and the training and inspiration of younger singers. I know that you've been a regular tutor at Dartington for many, many years, but what was your first introduction to Dartington?
In David Munro's class, actually. Yes, the year before he died, I think. And I was very, very beginnerish. It was fun. I seem to remember we had to wander around singing frottole, sacred frottole, penitential hymns, sort of more or less flagellating ourselves as though we were in early Renaissance Florence. And Savonarola was in charge. You know, it was all.
Oh, yes. Well, Dartington is the place to do that. Anything goes there.
Yes, Dartington's great because you've always got the topography on your side. So we've got some place you can find to do things like that. And yes, and Munro was delightful, of course, and it was great to have that little tiny glimpse of him. But he was gone, alas, before really I was on the scene at all. So I just enjoyed his radio programs and some of his recordings. But Dartington, yes, then I went there next time with Andrew Parrott, I think, and then with Anthony Rooley and the Consort. Dartington was always open to the early music revival people because the premises were so appropriate. It's crazy not to make music of the right period in the Great Hall, which is one of the most, as you know, one of the most beautiful acoustics you can sing in anywhere in the world. It makes everything sound wonderful. And I have enjoyed it year after year. I used to do it every 2 years because there was a summer school in Sweden I went to in between. And I always said, when my son was small, I always said not more than one summer school a year. That's kind of worn off a bit now. I think I've done 6 or 7 sometimes recently. Not this year, of course.
Yeah, sadly. And you're kept busy with the Dowland Works enterprise as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
And yes, Dowland Works began because Deborah Roberts and her excellent Brighton Early Music Festival, she and Claire Norman have run this brilliant festival for such a long time. And I've been there regularly, often with Jacob Lindberg, doing little Dowland or Purcell or both recitals in nice places in Brighton. And the Dowland 450th anniversary came up in 2013. And Deborah said, well, you came last year with Dowland, but it'd be nice if you'd come again. But, you know, my problem is I audition all these people. She and Claire, they worked so hard always to invite all the eager young players and singers to come and perform for them. And then when they tried to give them chances to play in a concert, they would find that the audience didn't come because they hadn't heard of them. Mm-hmm. So that was when it was decided, okay, let's have some old and young people together. And I went, Jacob Herringman and I came. Jacob is a wonderful lute player. And we first of all, we advertised for existing lute song duos, and a handful came along and auditioned, and we picked 2 or 3 of those. And then we did a class with them. So they chose some lute songs to perform, and we coached them in front of an audience who enjoyed that and felt a little proprietary, I think, towards those duos. And then the next night, when we had the concert with them, instead of giving each duo their 20-minute slot, we decided to mix everybody up, and we all sat in a semicircle, and the songs came from all over. And so the whole evening was shared by everyone. And the audience adored it, and actually so did we. And as it happened, I had the chance to bring the group also to Nottingham the next night, and they were very kind, and instead of having a duo, they accepted 8 people on the platform.
Nice.
And there's not much money in it, as you know, when you've got a platform full of people. But yes, afterwards, when we'd done those 2 concerts, all the singers and the young lute players said, when's the next one? So, and that was 7 years ago. So since then, we've met from time to time just to go through the repertoire and enjoy it and have fun with it. And then occasionally been offered chances to go and share it with in concert in lovely places. So it's not by no means a proper full-time ensemble like yours, but it is a club, and it's rather big now and lovely. And the people that I know have joined it, they are people that have already got a lot else in their careers. They've got lots of training. They can sing many more things than I can, but just love the lute as I do. And that's really what we all share.
It's great that you're able to bring your passion to the next generation of people.
I'm so lucky with the young lute players. I mean, they're the secret. I mean, really, Dowland Works is a handful of lutes and the singers they attract. That's what it is.
It's wonderful to see you giving so many masterclasses and keeping education at the forefront of your activities right now. You've been kind enough to talk about the Dowland Works enterprise, but when it comes to sort of seeing your former students, or indeed any students that you've worked with in masterclasses, performing in other contexts, is there something that gives you a real sort of spark of joy when you see that happening?
Well, the best thing is when they surprise me, actually, when they're producing things that are theirs and not mine. I think Dowland Works should be something that spins off into mad directions, because there are too many of us anyway. So if any duos form themselves and go off and do things, or duets of singers or whatever, or clusters, then I think that's very exciting. I think it's the best chance for everyone in any case in this very difficult climate, is to get together, form your groups and try your own ideas. And there have been some magnificent things that have happened in the last few years. So yes, that brings me huge pleasure. Plus, if someone like Guildhall, if I see students I know who've been coached by someone like Dionysios Kyropoulos on dramatic gesture, and they then show me the song after he's had a go at it, and I see the difference when he's really released the hidden drama in these people. That's very exciting too. I think it's just seeing what people do with odd suggestions that you might have made without even knowing what they added up to.
That's really lovely to hear. Thank you. I know that we've talked about so many topics, and we could talk for days on end, because it's really fabulous to talk to you and to hear all your opinions on things. I know that everyone at Somerville will send their very best wishes to you. You're fondly remembered, and I hope that at some point we'll have you back in the college to help impart some of your great sort of wisdom and philosophy onto current members of the college. Emma, thank you so much for talking with us today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. Good luck with everything.
Thank you.